Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course, and it's called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Dana Brownlee. She's the president of Professionalism Matters and the author of the book Unwritten Rules of Managing Up: Project Management Techniques from the Trenches. Professionalism Matters provides workshops on project management, team building, and communications. Her book is about building better relationships with senior leaders as a project manager, who typically has a lot of responsibility and little authority. I look forward to learning about her journey to starting her own company, writing a book, and her favorite speaking topics. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Dana.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here as well. It would have been kind of weird doing an interview by myself.
Yeah, that would be weird.
So from the bit of research I did on you, I saw that you got a degree in math. What was the motivation for getting that degree?
Well, my motivation was a full scholarship. That was my motivation.
Oh, that'll do it.
I think what happens, particularly, for females of color, when you demonstrate competency in the STEM fields or science or math in particular, you tend to be pushed in that direction. And so that's what happened with me. At the time, I got a scholarship from AT&T Bell Labs. And so I did get a full ride, and I did a dual undergraduate program. So I did a Bachelor of Science and Math at Spelman College. And then I did a Bachelor of Industrial Engineering at Georgia Tech.
Okay, yeah, I did notice that. You got math and then industrial engineering. I was like, man, she really must like STEM a lot to get two degrees.
It's the money, the free ride. My parents said there was no choice, but fortunately, I liked it. So, it worked out. It wasn't like I wanted to be a professional dancer or something, and they were pushing me into math. I mean, fortunately, I liked it. I enjoyed it. Ironically, my cousin at the time, she got a full ride as well from NASA, and we ended up being college roommates at Spelman. So, I don't know, maybe there's something genetic, but I never really thought about that. But yeah, I enjoyed it. So it worked out well.
Wow, your story is very similar to mine. The only difference is I didn't get a scholarship. So I wasn't very good. The crazy thing is when I was in high school, I was pretty average in math and science. I didn't and I didn't play with Legos as a child. I wasn't in robotics club, anything like that. And when people typically ask me why I got into engineering, I mean, the real reason is because my father said I should. And that's why I ended up going. I used to lie. The crazy thing is I used to lie about that reason because I thought it wasn't all that interesting a reason.
Right.
It just sounded like, oh, your father just told you what to do, but which is essentially what it was. But
Right.
I didn't really want to tell people that, but as I got older, I was just kind of like, you know what, the truth is the truth, and hey, and luckily it worked out for me too. So.
And it's not a bad impetus. I mean, we get into it for different reasons, and sometimes we need people around us to kind of encourage us. And I think that there's something instinctive, particularly in the Black community, that says, hey, push towards these fields, law, medicine, engineering, because of the career mobility and the possibility.
Yeah, for sure. But then I also saw that you got an MBA too. So what was the motivation for the MBA?
Well,
full ride scholarship again?
I did actually end up it was not a scholarship. What I got at the time, I worked for they were probably a Fortune 100, but definitely a Fortune 500. And so they had full reimbursement. So I was so fortunate. I ended up not having to pay for my MBA either. And so I was really, really fortunate in that regard, but it wasn't a scholarship. But for me, what happened was after I graduated from tech, I kind of, and I worked, I went out and worked, and I had a pretty traditional entry-level position. I was a metrics manager. So I was, doing something that was a little bit related to my field. So I kind of was at a crossroads. I had to decide, am I going to go the more technical route? I was studying for I don't even remember what it's called. Is it the GMAT? The test that you take for masters, or to go on that track of masters or PhD in math? Or do I want to go the business route and kind of broaden, genericize? So it's kind of like, do I want to deepen and get more technical, or do I want to broaden? And so I decided that I wanted to broaden. I wanted to, because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I think for me, math and engineering was just something that I excelled in. So, you know, I just kind of got pushed in that direction. But, you know, just because you're good in something doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do, and doesn't necessarily mean that that's your primary interest area. So I think I was trying to broaden instinctively because I felt like I might have some broader interest areas. And so that's why I pursued the MBA.
Okay. You're again, well, this doesn't apply to me directly, but this has to apply to with my younger sister. So she actually went to college and did pre-med. So she had every intention of going to medical school, but then she at some point changed her mind and ended up working as a project manager. And I remember asking her not too long ago, actually, maybe a couple months ago, why she changed her mind and didn't go into medicine. And she just said that, you know, project management she found more interesting than medicine. And so that's where she ended up doing.
Yeah, I think, you know, sometimes the earlier you can get in tune with your own kind of compass and, you know, tap into what really excites and motivates you, the better off you are. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that you may not want to try out a few things, because sometimes there is a bit of a process of elimination. But I think there are a lot of people somewhere along their career realize they're doing something they absolutely hate. Like I had a girlfriend that I went to Georgia Tech with, and she went into engineering for a lot of the same reasons that we've talked about. And she hated it. And so she said she always wanted to be a dentist. And so literally she went back to dental school. I think she was in like her early 30s or so, which, you know, now I'm almost 50, so that seems young, but at the time it seemed old to be going back to school. And so now she's been a thriving dentist for quite a long time. So I do think there's a lot to be said for following your passion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had other women engineers on the panel, and one of them told me that women tend to leave engineering more so than men. And so I was curious as to why that was. So I just did a bit of research myself, and at least from what I saw, one of the bigger reasons is that the environment in engineering, the engineering industry isn't welcoming to women. And I found that kind of shocking, but then I thought, you know, what do I know? I'm a guy. But then there's other, but then
Yeah.
I learned from other guests on the YouTube channel that they actually left because, I mean, I guess similar to your friend who became a dentist, it's just they preferred to be a dentist as opposed to being an engineer. So, I mean, if that's the case, then why would you want that person to stay an engineer just because
Sure.
you know, there are less, you know, women engineers? You want people to do what they want to do ultimately.
Sure, sure. And I think both those reasons are completely valid. I mean, if you look at the numbers, you know, I'm sure in most engineering organizations, women are a pretty significant minority. And so what happens when you're a significant minority is the environment tends to not um, mirror your interests. And, you know, go somewhere between, there's a continuum between not mirroring your interests to being openly hostile. And so for a lot of people, choose not to work in that environment. And that's not all environments. I'm sure they're great engineering environments. For me personally, I guess I worked in some engineering environments, but I was more so in what I would consider to be like vanilla business, corporate America, versus like when I interned at Bell Labs, I consider that like a hardcore R&D research engineering sort of environment. But yeah, I think there are lots of reasons why people either choose to stay or choose to leave.
Yeah, for sure. So you go down this business path and you eventually come across project management, and so much so you became so much of a expert in it that you ended up even writing a book about it. What was it about project management that drew you in?
Well, it's funny when you were saying that you were a little bit surprised that your sister ended up in project management. I was saying to myself, well, I'm not surprised, just because project management is such a generic skill set that is so applicable almost everywhere. I mean, name me an industry that does not need project managers. I mean, projects are just how complicated work gets done. So to me, it's a skill set that's very much in demand, very applicable, it's somewhat generic and ubiquitous. So it's, it's not surprising to me that a lot of people would find themselves in that area. Now, for me personally, I think project management, kind of going back to the industrial engineering is all about efficiency and how to do things efficiently and be very organized. That is like ingrained in my DNA. I mean, just that's how I'm wired. I'm wired as someone who likes to be analytical and organized and structured and dot my I's and cross my T's. So I think project management was a very natural fit for me. So I think I fell into it somewhat intuitively in that sense. And I enjoyed it. I liked it. So that was kind of the genesis for me.
Based on the education you received in math and engineering, how did that, if at all, inform your work in project management?
That's a great question. Probably more indirectly than directly. I think that there are very few positions, I think, that use pure math. I mean, we all use rudimentary math every day, but the math I'm using now is like fourth grade math. It's not, the math I was using in college, or, it's like prove that 1 is greater than 2 or prove that 1/2 is an integer, or I don't know, is 1/2 an integer? I'm not sure. But now I'm getting confused. But
it's not.
Yeah, but it's not. Okay. The integers are the negatives and the positives, right?
They're both the negatives and the positives. Those are the integers, yeah.
Right. Okay. So what is like 1/2? What is that? That's not, because is that a real number? Yeah.
It is a real number, yes.
Okay, it's a real number. Okay. All right. Well, let's get off that. So, in a direct sense, you're not necessarily using it on a regular basis, but there are two main ways that I think that it really helped me. One, we talked about the structure and being analytical. It teaches you how to be analytical, how to break things down, how to, when we talked about, prove that 1 is greater than 0, that's logic. I mean, and that might be like a 2-page proof that I ended up doing to prove that 1 is greater than 0. Or if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. So it's just that logical thinking. You have those years of just training your mind to think in that way. Probably not dissimilar from the type of thinking that lawyers need to have. I actually thought about going to law school for a second, but that's a whole nother aside. So I think that part of that is one area that I think where it benefited me. Another area, and I hate to say this, but I'm just being honest, is just being comfortable and confident with math and with numbers. I see it all the time. In fact, the election just happened, and I saw some reporter, and she was out there in the field, and they were giving her the numbers in her ear. And so she was having to kind of add on the fly or trying to come up with a ballpark of what percentage Biden got versus Trump. And she just blurted out, well, I'm not good with numbers, so you guys have to, calculate it. And I've seen that throughout my life. People who, for their entire life, they've been told you're not good with numbers, or you're not good in math. I think that it really does something to your self-confidence. I really do think that it does. And I think that for me, having that background in math, hey, I just proved live that, I messed that up. Like, I didn't know that it wasn't an integer. It's not so much about the fact, but it's just about the confidence. I'm comfortable with it. I'm not going to be completely freaked out by it. In fact, when I had my first semester of business school, when we got into, it was one of the econ classes, and they started taking differentials and integrating. And so as a math major, I had done years of, differentiating and integrating, and I was just very comfortable with that. But the other people who weren't math majors were freaked out. I mean, they were completely freaked out. But for me, I was just really comfortable. So I do think that it gives you a comfort, it gives you a confidence that I think is just important throughout your career.
Yeah, for sure. Now that you mentioned, now I'm questioning whether I was right on what integers are.
we're gonna look it up. I just remember studying that. I remember whole numbers, counting and natural numbers were the same thing. And then they had real. I think real included like everything, all the fractions. And then integers, I know, was like positives and negatives, but at any rate.
Yeah, no, I'm out here trying to correct people now. I don't even know if I'm right.
But see, you're proving my point. We both had the confidence, we had the confidence. And if I'm not wrong, I don't fundamentally question my intelligence, But for people who aren't strong in math and science, when they're not right about something, I think psychologically it's different for them, for some of them. I think that they fundamentally feel like they're not as good or they're not as smart. And so for me, for my entire life, I just think being strong and confident in math, I think has been just a huge benefit overall. Because half of success is confidence. So my business, how did I start my business? I was working as a business strategy consultant. Probably was the best job I think I've ever had, working for somebody else and enjoying it. But as a strategy consultant, I'm essentially going out there, I'm facilitating sessions, I'm developing my content, I'm facilitating team building activities. I'm basically the product. I worked for a major company, but I'm basically the product. Really enjoyed it. And at the same time, I had worked for a lot of major companies. So I, worked for a lot of Fortune 500, probably 100 companies. And so with those companies, they always sent you to training classes. And as I was sitting through those training classes, I was like, I like taking the class, but I was like, I could see myself doing that. That's kind of what I love to do. Like, I have the somewhat technical side, but I have the love of oratory. And hence my comment before about I teetered with the thought of becoming a lawyer, because I like to be analytical, but I like to talk. I just love speaking. I love presenting. So as I sat through those training classes, I was like, I really think I want to do that one day. And so I just continued on with my career, but it was kind of in the back of my mind. And so in 2003, when the company that I was with was going through some reorgs, I just called up HR. Well, not just randomly, I had been planning on it, but I called up HR one day and asked for a package. And then said, why don't I just do this for myself? Instead of doing essentially the same thing I've been doing for this company, I could just do it for myself. And so that was the genesis of my company. And then Professionalism Matters, me and my director, we were on projects together, and it just cracked us up all the time how these major companies and these major projects, and at the end of the day, a lot of times the problems were such simple things like this person didn't respond to the email, or they had a miscommunication over something, or instead of emailing back and forth all the time, they should have just gotten the right people together in a room, or there's certain key things that they didn't decide about at the beginning of the project, just these little small things. And we kind of had this running joke where we would say, professionalism matters. And so that was the name that I chose for the company.
All right. So it's one thing to have that kind of expertise in project management. It's another thing altogether to write a book about it. What was the motivation for putting your book together?
So I was speaking on a range of different professional development topics. So I would speak at different conferences about communication skills, about project management, about team building, lots of different things. And when I would open it up for Q&A at the end, one of the first questions I would always get is, but Dana, what if my boss is the problem? Or what if I've got a senior level leader who's the one who's dominating the sessions, or who's the one who never responds to the emails, or whatever the topic was that I was talking about for that day. And so because I noticed there was so much of an appetite for that, I wrote a white paper in 2010 for PMI, the Project Management Institute, called The Project Manager's Guide for Dealing with a Difficult Sponsor. And so then after I wrote that white paper, I just kind of developed a presentation around that because there was, again, so much interest in it. So I started giving this talk at different conferences. And so a publisher reached out to me, I think it was 2018, and said, hey, we see this talk that you're going to give in Chicago. We're going to be at the conference. We'd love to meet you at the conference. So essentially that's how the book came about. I didn't really have a plan to write a book, but the publisher attended my session. They reached out to me, and then I wrote the book.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of the genesis of the book. So who is this book geared towards, and what do you hope they get out of it?
The book is called, and I actually have a copy right here, The Unwritten Rules of Managing Up, Project Management Techniques from the Trenches. And interestingly enough, when I was getting ready to write the book, of course, I had had my own experience. I had, talked on this topic for almost a decade. But I said, I really want to get other people's experiences. I know I'm not the only one who struggles with this, as, dealing with difficult senior leader personalities. Because as a project manager, you're like herding cats like half the time. And you've got different people with competing priorities. And particularly when they're senior level people or executives or clients, people that you can't really tell them, hey, you need to do this. It's hard. And so I think as a project manager, I had just naturally developed these kind of techniques for managing up, for staying ahead of them, for satisfying these different personalities. So as I was getting ready to write the book, I said, I'm going to put out a survey to get other people's ideas and suggestions, et cetera. And I was really intimidated at the thought of doing this survey because, like, I'm not Beyonce. I don't have some huge following. I'm like, who's going to respond to this survey? Like, nobody wants to do a survey. And then I'm asking you to talk about, dealing with a difficult boss. I could not believe it. Within I think it was about 3 weeks, I got almost 1,200 responses to the survey. So I got so much feedback. I think people thought it was like cathartic. Like they were like, I didn't even know that this is what this was called, but I've done this throughout my whole career and it's just saved me. And so I just feel really strongly. And I was the same way. I never really heard the term managing up probably until about 5 years ago, but it's a skill that I had developed. It's something that I had learned the hard way. They really made the difference in terms of my relationships throughout my career and just my effectiveness as a project manager. And certainly it's a skill set, not just for project managers, but for anybody. But the reason why we have the subtitle in there is because project managers are in this unique role a lot of times where they've got to reach an outcome. They've got to get here. And the people that they're dependent on to help them get there are oftentimes not people who are reporting to them. I mean, it's a lot easier to have influence over people when they're reporting to you. You just tell them to do it. But these are people by and large who aren't reporting to them. And then to make matters worse, then they've got all these, sponsors and executives and vendors and clients, all these other people that they've got to try to satisfy. And sometimes those people are difficult. At least in my experience, they have been pretty difficult. So it's a skill set, like I said, that I developed kind of organically. And so in the book, what we do is we take 6 different personality types: the dominator, the micromanager, the clueless chameleon, the wishful thinker, 6 of them. And we give you techniques for how to best manage those types of difficult boss. But before I forget, not just for difficult bosses, I used a lot of these techniques with most of the bosses that I had. And ironically, most of my direct bosses were great, but just great, great skills to throw into your bag of tricks.
Wonderful. When it comes to public speaking generally, I guess for the presentations that you have to give, whether it's for your book or for anything else, do you have a process for putting your presentations together? And if so, what is it?
So for me, the content is one major piece of it. And then once I have the content and I'm clear on that, then I'm really figuring out, okay, how do I spice it up? How do I make it engaging? How do I make it interesting? My 2 big goals with any presentation are, 1, to make it engaging so that people feel, like they participated in something that was interesting. Like, again, it's not an hour of your life you're never going to get back. But then the other goal for me is, do I give you something really practical that you can use? Because I hate that as well. I hate it when I go to listen to speakers and they get you all lathered up and then you go back to your desk and you got the same problems you had before and you don't have anything new in your bag of tricks to help address it. So I try to make them very practical. So for me, that means interspersing activities into the presentations, examples, anecdotes. I'm a big believer in telling stories. There's, a lot of times when you go to a presentation, you may forget the numbers or the, what was on the slides, but you'll remember that great story or that great example. So I try to use a lot of that as well.
Those are really great points, especially when it comes to more technical presentations. When I used to have to give presentations, telling a story was probably the furthest from my mind, but you're absolutely right when it comes to storytelling. It helps to kind of cement what you're even talking about because people like listening to stories.
They do. And, another tip I'll share, and I've shared this when I've worked with people who are, trying to improve their presentation skills. I think sometimes, some people hate PowerPoint. I like PowerPoint. But you've got to go beyond the PowerPoint, because again, you could just email it to them and, they can read. I mean, everybody in the audience can read. So I say, focus less on the what, focus more on the so what. So you might have a certain point on that slide, but why should they care about it? What does it, what difference does it make in their life? So I try to focus people. I mean, the slide's there, they can read it. They can read the what. In terms of verbally, let's talk about the so what. Why is this so important? How does this impact you? Why should you care about this? So I think that that's an important element to keep in the back of your mind as well.
For sure. When it comes to public speaking, do you ever get nervous before your presentations? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
Not much. I will say I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate that is not as much of an issue for me as I think it is for some people. I think that, just as everyone else has said, I'm sure the more you do it, the more comfortable you are. The other key is I don't step outside of my lane. I don't get out there and pretend. And I've had many requests to do presentations on topics that were way outside of my lane. I make sure I'm not going to give a presentation when I'm just a chapter in the book ahead of you. I'm going to make sure that I'm competent. I have that expertise. I know what the heck I'm talking about. I can answer those questions. I can give you 5 examples. And I think that once you go into just with that, now I'm not saying I know everything, but with that expertise, I'm very, very confident. So I think it just gives you a lot of ease. Now, if you ask me to, you talked about filing patents, you asked me to give a presentation on filing patents and you sent me a bunch of links to read up on it and then give a presentation, I probably would be nervous because I know that I'm pretending somewhat. I know I don't have the lived work experience behind that. So I think a lot of it is just the preparation, just knowing your subject matter area. Some of it is also just how I'm wired. I am more comfortable presenting in front of a group of 500 than I am sitting down having an intimate conversation with 5 people. So, because I'm extroverted in a certain way, but I'm also introverted in another way. So for me, it's just, and I know for some people it's the opposite, like they're much more comfortable in a small casual setting, but standing up in front of a bunch of people is more intimidating. But for me, as long as I know what the heck I'm talking about, I'm golden with the large group.
Yeah, for sure. You know what? I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of just being comfortable with what you're talking about, then maybe the nerves aren't much as there. And not only that, but when it comes to public speaking, it's really important to talk about things that you actually know. So you're absolutely right there. Don't try to go, as you said, go outside your lane. Stay well within it. And that would help with your nerves for sure.
Yeah, and let me give you one other tip on that, because I'm not saying I never have nerves. I've absolutely had times where I've had nerves. But something that has always been really helpful for me is come up with an icebreaker or a story or a riddle or something that is applicable to many different areas or industries or audiences, and get it down cold. Because for me, and I think for a lot of people who present, you might have nerves at the very beginning, but once you get into the flow of it, you get much more comfortable. And so what I found is if you can have some story that really can apply to lots of different topics, for me, it was always an icebreaker. There's this one icebreaker that I used for years that was a great takeaway that I could apply, whether I was talking about project management or leadership or communication skills. I could make it match anything. And it was a little trick and it was fun for the audience. So it's a great way to capture them just really quickly, bring them in. But it was also a great way for me to start feeling the audience out and to get comfortable and to get control of the room. And so I think that's another tip, is find whatever that is. And that way you kind of captivate the room, but you also minimize your nerves at the same time.
For sure. This has been really interesting learning more about you, Dana, and also, any kind of tips that you have in your journey in public speaking. Is there anything that you'd like to add about things that you're working on?
Gosh, well, I think the most well, two things. One, I'm developing some courses for LinkedIn Learning, and I'm really excited about that. They're just a wonderful organization. I just rolled out, well, I didn't roll it out, LinkedIn Learning rolled it out, but they just published my first course, which is Essentials of Team Collaboration. So if you're leading a team or working on a team that's struggling, or you might be working in a new team anytime soon, check out that course. I provide a lot of really practical tips, and I'm also developing 2 courses focused on workplace anti-racism, and those are going to be coming out next year. And I also write for Forbes. I'm a senior contributor for careers, and so I publish about 5 articles a month. So if you want to keep in contact with me, please follow me on LinkedIn and Forbes. That's where I publish almost all my new content.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is a public speaking course called Teach the Geek to Speak. To learn more about it, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.